want to call the October 15th Municipal Committee to order. And first thing on the agenda would be the roll call.
Alderman Bill Van Buskert.
Present.
Alderman Janet Emerson.
Here.
Alderman Greg Walters.
Here.
Alderman Jim Azier. Alderman Derek Ward.
Here.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry, we have the approval of the September 17th minutes that was in the packet distributed to you. Are there any changes or corrections that need to be made to that?
Anyone? Is there anyone who would like to make a motion to approve those minutes?
I would make a motion to approve.
Very good. A second?
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Van Buskert, do you approve those?
Yes.
Alderman Emerson?
Yes.
Alderman Walters?
Yes.
Alderman Ward?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Wilson, would you go ahead and read the first thing that's on the agenda for
Yes, sir.
discussion items?
Consideration of proposed changes to City Code, Chapter 42, Traffic and Motor Vehicles. This is pertaining to the contract towing services, and I've asked Chief Hudspeth to give you an overview of this, and then we'll entertain questions.
Very good.
Good evening. This is part one of two things we need to accomplish over the next several meetings to explore managed services. Managed tow services. I kind of like to start with an overview of how we operate and how we utilize tow services now and explain what the changes are. It is kind of down in the weeds, so I expect to have some questions. Feel free to ask, and I'll try to clear up procedurally what these changes would mean for us and for the community as well. Currently, we have a contract with one tow vendor, and that was a bid process, a formal bid process. That contract comes to expiration in December of this year. So, and we learned that through that contract procedure, it took a lot of management. There's a lot of administrative work in both vetting tow truck companies, tow truck lots, et cetera, managing those various tow companies throughout the contract. So we started looking at how some neighboring agencies are doing this, and that's where we discovered this managed tow service. A managed tow service is basically we arrange the service provider, which is the company known as Auto Returns, who we've been talking with, and they manage all of that vetting process. So it really alleviates a lot of the administrative staff work in order to provide actually arguably a much better service to the community. As you see here on the thing, with one vendor, sometimes there's wait times. They can't be everywhere. With one vendor, we experience sometimes when they're maybe in another part of the city and we have to wait for our turn, so to speak. I already mentioned the significant amount of staff time and vetting these tow companies and visiting their lots and evaluating the vendor as part of that bid process. And there's no standardized fee structure. This is a little bit complicated, but police officers order tow trucks for a variety of reasons. Sometimes you're at the scene of an incident in which an arrest is made or there's evidentiary value of the vehicle, and we would consider that a police tow, where the police are towing it for their own purposes. Okay, that's what the contract covers, is that fee. Our current contract covers those types of situations. However, if we just happen across somebody that happens to be stranded on the side of the road, we can still order a tow for them, any tow company they like, but we really don't have any control over what that fee structure ends up, or what they end up getting charged. And that's where you hear stories about predatory tow practices in the news. If you follow this at all, you've seen that there's been some pretty outrageous situations in which community members are getting gouged, or their insurance companies, I should say, are getting gouged. And that's kind of a gap. That's one of the things, a gap that a lot of cities have worked to try and correct. Okay, and that's kind of where we are with our current situation. What going to a managed service would allow us to do is it actually increases the number of tow trucks that we would have available because they use a GPS dispatching based deal. So the tow truck drivers all have apps on their phone, and whenever we have need for a tow truck, they use that GPS system to dispatch the closest truck. So it minimizes the wait time on scene. Okay, because it's a managed service, We're not required to vet these tow companies. That auto return company will do that for us. That's part of the service contract, is they visit the lots, they make sure they all have liability insurance and all the requirements they need to be to be vetted. They handle all that for us. We don't have to do this. It takes no staff time other than reading the contract and bringing it to you. It also standardizes that fee structure. Like I described a second ago, when that situation where we call a tow company and it's not for our purposes, we have no control over how they are billed. Anytime we would call a tow, that would make it part of the contract, and it standardizes the fee that the citizen would have to pay. So it prevents that price gouging aspect. They can't, charge. Sometimes people will sign anything when they're stranded on the side of the road, right? Well, this will actually control those costs, because anytime we order a tow for whatever purpose, it controls the cost that gets passed on to the vehicle owner. It'll also allow, we have several tow companies in the city now. It's more inclusive of those tow companies. One of the things that we're looking to change in this ordinance is not restricting tow companies that just operate in the city. Currently, you have to have a tow lot in the city of Raytown. And just a quick Google, you can see there's about 6 or 7 within a few miles of the city that would be included in this. We're going to limit that through the contract to a geographic proximity. So if somebody's car gets towed, they don't have to drive to Liberty to pick it up. It'd still be in the Raytown area. But that gives us more service providers, which, again, increases or decreases our wait times. And probably the last point there is we're not subject to the contract squabbles and complaints and this sort of thing, because that's all outsourced. It's handled through auto return. The changes before you in the ordinance were reviewed by the legal department, and these are the things that we need to get done in order for us to pursue that managed service. The document we sent out earlier was just an example. The fees are, this is a self-funding service. They tack on about a $25 charge, which pays for the use of the managed service. So there's no out-of-pocket costs of the city budget. There's zero fiscal impact for us to use this managed service to accomplish this contract. Probably poorly worded. But I feel like I'd like to answer any questions you might have before I just keep going on and on. Anything specific that you thought about after looking over the material we sent out earlier?
Ms. Emerson?
Thank you. From experience, we have had multiple problems in Raytown with towing service. People have been gouged outrageously. There is no fee structure. And I think to have only one tow company is wrong, because I think you should have multiple ones that you can use. And going with this plan, you would have that, and you would have a definite fee structure, which probably will come down the road later, and it would come to the Board of Aldermen, right, concerning
Yes, ma'am.
what
We have
fees.
to get the ordinances squared away in order to
Right.
get to that next step.
And I saw the preliminary, I guess just a rough draft of what it might be, but I'm sure that's very negotiable, and we're a much smaller town than
The
that
deal is
one.
on that is that
Okay.
Kansas City's is quite a bit higher than ours would be, because they operate their own tow lot. They don't have a tow truck service. They contract that out, but they have their own police lot. So that has employees and all kinds of logistical expenses, which is why theirs is so much higher than ours would be. Our price would be much closer to what it is currently, with the administrative fee tacked on, around the $100 range.
Okay. Well, I just think it would be an excellent idea, and I think that we should go ahead with it, and then, find out, get the contract going so that we'll know exactly where we stand with it.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Alderman Ward?
And I think Ms. Emerson asked this, and I think you answered it, but I was reading through my notes to try and find the point I wanted, or the question I wanted to ask. But regarding the fees and regarding the contracts, those would come to the Board of Aldermen in both cases for us to approve. I mean, this
Yes,
just,
sir.
okay, wouldn't be something that's set. So if I understand this correctly, the idea is we would put this contract out for bid, and multiple parties could agree to sign this contract, is that?
Well, we wouldn't actually put a bid out. We would contract with the service provider, and they manage the tow truck companies. Is that what you're asking?
Okay, so we would hire
Yeah,
what?
we hire
Jim's towing administrative company, who then,
we would just contract with the company that's called Auto Return.
okay.
And they manage all of those details that you're describing there. The tow truck companies themselves, we actually use a software platform to order their tows. So we're not even calling the tow truck companies directly. It's all managed through the auto return service. So they handle all of those logistics, versus now we're doing it. Did that answer the question?
Well, and, I mean, is this a reputable company, or is this?
Oh, yeah. Actually, the only reason we're even eligible for this contract is because they have the Kansas City contract, so they're already set up. They're usually with like large metro agencies.
Okay.
We're just so close to Kansas City, and it's the same geographical area, they were willing to take us on.
And whatever criteria we set.
We get to set our own fee schedule, yes.
Well, in terms of where it can get towed and,
Absolutely.
okay.
One of the things we didn't want to have happen is you have to drive to North Kansas City or Liberty or someplace far
Smithville,
away to pick
right,
up your vehicle. I mean, that's not helping anybody. So we were real careful to make sure that those kind of parameters were doable. One thing that does get asked that you haven't asked yet, and it just occurred to me, is this has no effect on private arrangements of tows. Okay?
Right, I get
Yeah,
it.
if you have a tow company you like and you want to call them, they do it for $20. It has nothing to do with our fee schedule. It wouldn't be impactful at all. It's only when the police
But if I was involved in an accident and I said I would like to have this party dispatched, then I would get the benefit of the city terms?
The only time that the city terms would apply is if the police department orders the tow.
Right, but if I tell the officer, can you call me a tow?
Yes, then it would
Okay.
come through this. At your request, you would be
Right.
it'd be part of the fee schedule and auto
Okay,
return.
but I would still get benefit of all those terms and protections. Okay, thank you.
Alderman Walters?
There. My question is, what other communities around here are using this service?
Kansas City right now, Platte City is as well. That's it. Again, a lot of them aren't large enough or they're too far from Kansas City, and they measure their tows and how many thousands of cars do you tow a year? That was their first question to us, which obviously we're nowhere near that. So we were just fortunate to be close enough to Kansas City to take advantage of it.
Are there competing tow services out there
Not in this area. Well, tow services, yes.
as opposed to what they're offering?
Managed services, not to my knowledge.
Okay, and I'm a little bit puzzled by one other thing. It says we have to negotiate after we get the contract signed.
No. This is just the code changes that would allow us to move forward with that contract. When we ask for the contract to be approved, that's when we be bringing forth a fee schedule, the actual contract, et cetera, et cetera. But we can't put that contract in place with the ordinances the way they're currently written.
Is our current provider aware of this?
Yes.
That this is one something we're looking at?
Yes.
I'm curious as to what his position is on it, or does he have one?
I haven't talked to him about it, so I don't know. It's obviously going to be, I think it would be something he would need to answer for you. I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking for him.
Okay, thank you.
But the contract is coming to a close, so one way or the other, we've got to do something.
Well, if we don't get it done right away, they would go to month to
Sure.
month, wouldn't they?
Yeah, most likely.
It concerns me that the only Kansas City and Platte City, which I'm certain doesn't reach the criteria that we're supposed to reach either. Maybe they're doing the same thing where they're piggybacking onto Kansas City, but that's quite a ways north. Or is it south? It's north. Anyway, I wonder about that. And like Lee Summit, Independence, they're not.
Independence manages, these other agencies manage it in-house, which is kind of how we're doing it.
Uh-huh.
But they also manage a rotation. So they're dedicating people to, by people I mean their own employees, to managing those
Okay.
tow relationships. We're trying to get out of that and streamline that whole process, and this is a no-cost way to do that.
Okay. Let's say someone has a complaint over a fee or something that happened to their car, that's scratched or something like that. Who would be the arbitrator in that?
Auto return carries, they handle all that.
They handle it all. So If we could find out who we could talk to within the city of Kansas City that's worked with them.
Yeah, we've been frequent. I actually spoke with him today. We've been in frequent contact with him.
Okay. 'Cause I'd like to see what their track record's been. And
They just re-signed a contract, I believe, for 7 years.
they did?
If
Okay.
that tells you anything.
It's a long time. All right. Thank you.
Have there been problems with the current provider, the one that we have the contract with now? Because there was some, mention of some gouging and things like that, but that's didn't happen with our current provider
We've
that
had
we're
the same provider
contracted
for a
with.
long time. No,
Yeah.
no problems there.
And that provider's been doing that for something like 36 years, I think. Is that correct?
Could be. It's longer
Think
than
so.
I've been here. I don't know.
Yeah, a long time. And I know that the current police towing fee is $90 from that
Right.
current contract, right? I was looking at and I know that you said we can't compare necessarily what Kansas City was showing for this auto return, but we're not going to really be able, I don't understand how we're going to negotiate with them because they probably are going to basically set the fees for us, and we would be at their mercy, I would think. There's only one company here, Auto Return.
You want
Go
me
ahead.
to weigh in on that one? Their fee is $25 per tow, flat, period. That's
Okay,
it.
and which is added on,
Added on to the tow
that the
bill.
customer's going to have to pay for that
The fee that we
$25
set, yes.
for the management fee. So
Yes.
it's adding a fee on that isn't there currently, right?
Correct.
And I'm sure that Kansas City's goes to probably all of them to Front Street in the Kansas City tow lot, right? Theirs all go there. Is that
It
correct?
depends on if they're holding it for police services or if it's just
Yeah.
private tow.
If it's a police tow, it would go there, right? Well, right now, the tow lot that is being currently utilized by our with the current contract that we have is in Raytown. Nothing's going to be, we have 10 square miles. Nothing's going to be towed any long distance. So, how you were talking about other tow lots that would be utilized. How much cost would be added because of that if it's going to be towed a longer distance? And is the person that has had their vehicle towed, are they going to know which lot to go? How are they going to know which lot to go to retrieve their vehicle?
Yeah, that's all handled through the auto return service. 5-mile radius is what we're setting with the vendor.
But I was looking at the fees that Kansas City is charging, and which are pretty exorbitant compared to what we're paying now for police tows. Just a normal tow is $265 as compared to our $90. And of course, Kansas City has a huge volume, so I can't imagine why ours would be lower.
Well, I can shed some light on that. Speaking with Kansas City's tow lot earlier today, only 100 of that 260 that they charge goes to the tow truck driver. Another 140 goes to the Kansas City Police Department to run that tow lot, and then 25 goes to auto return. We're not running a tow lot.
Yeah, but of course, they also charge a daily fee for the tow lot.
None of that applies. We're not running a tow lot.
Yeah, but Kansas City does.
Right.
And so I think it's 30 a day just for a normal, which can go up to, if you're talking about a heavy vehicle, can go up to 70 a day. So the fees go up with the size of vehicle considerably. Do they pay this $25 fee to the management company?
Kansas City?
Yes.
Yes, sir. They've been in contract with them for a while.
And that's the same fee they pay to the management company.
I believe they handle Las Vegas, several agencies out in California, and it's $25. $22 to them and like a $3 administrative fee to the tow company.
Sounds like a pretty sweet deal for the management company to me, but
Well, there's an increase in service level and a lessening of demand on our staff, and it gets us out of the contract dispute business. So there's some articulable advantages to it.
Have we had a problem? What kind of problems have we had with our current contract?
It's a competitive business, okay? And with that comes a whole host of people being competitive. You know, we've actually had to change ordinances earlier this year because of the
Yes.
sort of things that were going on. That doesn't stop on the street. It also extends into the contract phase, which is coming up, and that's why we're trying to outsource it.
And you feel like this would eliminate that kind of problem? How would that eliminate it?
Because it's outsourced. There are complaints or the inability to participate in services for the city of Raytown. It's more inclusive in that regard. All you have to do is get vetted through the company, and they can be included. But they don't. It doesn't. It's not. The onus of vetting isn't on the police department or the staff.
If people are showing up now, and we have a contract with one provider, and we have ordinances that say they're not supposed to do that, right?
That's helped a lot.
Has that eliminated most of that?
Yes, on the street it has. Yes. It's also generated some complaints, but yes.
I guess, the bottom line for me is what's best for the citizens of our city. That's
Agreed.
what I'm looking at.
Agreed. And I think that's one of the great features of this deal is it standardizes that fee. I've seen tow bills from in the private situations up to $2,000. Getting gouged like that when you get your car towed. I would certainly not want to be in the position where you ask me to tow your car, and as a police officer, and I have no reason to put a hold on it, so I arrange for that private tow, and then you get billed $1,500 by a tow company that tries to gouge you. I would not want to try to answer for that. That's why the standardizing of fees is such an important deal.
But that could still happen because each individual, if it's just an auto accident that they're in, it's not a police tow, and they choose, a tow company.
They do it on their own, sure.
That could still happen.
It comes through auto return.
What kind of guarantee would we have that those fees would be reasonable if they asked for the police to make the determination as to who, or go through the auto return for those private tows?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Well, if you have the private tow, you have an accident, and so you tell the police department, please get me a tow to take this to the repair shop. It's not a police tow, but you just said you could do that, right?
Sure.
And there would be a standardized fee for that. What guarantee is there that that's going to be a reasonable fee compared to what's being charged now by local tow companies? I'm not familiar with all of the local tow companies, and I know
that's what setting the contract does and setting the fee schedule. So if they engage in business with auto return, they have to be vetted and approved by auto return, which they in turn agree to adhere to our fee schedule. Theoretically, somebody could violate a fee schedule just like anything else, and they would get kicked out of the auto return rotation, and it would be a civil matter. But as far as how we control those costs, it's through that contract and setting of fees.
I'm still curious as to how, or get confused a little bit as to how these
Can I try
fees,
asking it a different way? Because I think I understand.
how these fees are going to be set. Give me just a moment, and I'll let you interject that. How these fees are going to be set when we're dealing with one company out here, this auto return, who manages this, and basically they contract with numerous tow companies, and I'm not sure how we negotiate a fee that's reasonable if we're dealing with one company.
Let me try to answer that. So he's the tow broker. We're running tow companies. The only way he's going to call on us to do the Raytown is that we agree to the fee structure that the city of Raytown enters into the agreement with Auto Tow on. If we won't agree to adhere to those tow fees, we will not be in the Raytown rotation thereof. And you as a board will approve the contract, which includes the fee structure that says these are the standard fees when a PD call goes to Auto Tow that every tow company who's in that rotation has to adhere to. Does that help explain how that is? Those fees will be set in the contract with Auto Tow, and no one in the rotation can charge anything in exception to that fee structure. That's how that happens.
Well, I think the confusion is,
Okay,
is that,
Alderman Ward, go ahead.
yeah, but Mr. Chairman, I think I have sort of the same question you do. I mean, under our current contract with our current provider, if the police were called at the car owner's request and said, hey, can you dispatch a tow for me? That would already be subject to the limitations of that contract, correct? I mean,
The private tow.
and that company that is
We're calling on your behalf, but we're not involved in the dealings thereafter.
and so the current contract we have with the city tow provider doesn't have a provision that says if we call you on a private tow, you agree to honor these prices?
Correct. The contract specifies that if you ask for a private tow, we're going to call our contract tow person. But if you say, hey, call Laser Tow for me, or some of these.
Well, I understand that if I ask call a third party, but
They're all just private tows. They're not bound by the contract.
Well, I thought last spring or whenever we talked about this, the answer is that no, the public was protected because if I asked for a private tow through the city contractor, that we got protection of that contract. I mean, was that your question, Bill? I mean, and I do have a few more things, but I didn't want to.
Well, I don't know. I don't think there's any protection of that, but I don't think there's been any problem with any type of gouging from the company that we've had our contract with for police towing when they've done private tows. I've never heard of anyone getting gouged by that company. I don't think that has happened. I know that has happened with some other tow companies in town, and I know there's even been news stories on TV about some of these companies gouging people and telling them there's going to be a specific amount, and then when they after they get it towed, that goes up 2 or 3 times. Go ahead, Mr. Ward.
Thank you. So I noticed one of the other points on this particular agenda item dealt with the towing of illegally parked cars. That's sub B of this particular topic. And so just real quickly, as we have made these various changes and we're looking at this.
I think we'll need to address that
Is that not all?
separately as another item on the agenda. I think
Well,
we need
it is-
to address this first part first, and then we can go to that.
Well, it's all part of the changes of Chapter 42.
That is correct, except for we wanted to address all of the changes related to contracting for tow first and make sure we answered all those questions before we went into your second bullet point that you had asked.
Okay, I mean, I'm fine to leave that for later. That's fine.
Okay.
And I guess my last question on this particular part is, why do I feel like we're being rushed on this? I mean, we got this dropped off kind of on a municipal committee, and we're taking this up with the full board tonight.
Well, really, because we just found out about it a couple of months ago and started the research and didn't want to, I mean, it wasn't even on our radar, when we started at the beginning of the year. We had planned on going through the whole motion again of trying to, doing a bid process and all the drama that entails until we discovered this just through some due diligence and research. It's definitely not meant to be rushed. We're finally to a place where we've had to deal with making some proposed code changes and first of all, just to even see if they'd be willing to work with us. We're a small agency, and that took some back and forth. We weren't talking with the owner of Auto Return. We were talking with a rep, and it takes some back and forth to see if they would take us on as a client. We've been working on this since the summer, and we're finally to a point that we're ready to move on it.
Well, I appreciate that, but I just don't know that that's the standard practice to send it to municipal committee and 20 minutes later send it to the full board. I mean, that just.
Well,
We're only asking for a first read at the full board. We anticipated that if you had any amendments you would like for us to incorporate in this, we would have the full month. Because we're delayed due to the election so late in November, we were trying to help them so that if you made the decision that this was the process you wanted to go, they could, in a timely manner, bring back a contract for your consideration and still meet the deadline of the expiration of the current contract. So staff was trying to work within the small few weeks that we still have left in this calendar year.
Why does it have to be done on this calendar year?
because we were advised by PD that the current contract expires December 31st, 2019.
But we just heard a few minutes ago, I thought that would run month to month.
We have that, that's why, what I was about to say is, take your time with it, because we
Okay.
can go to a month to month. It's
Okay.
not like it's a sky is falling kind of
Okay.
situation.
Alderman Emerson?
Thank you. On the current contract, are there set fees, or does he charge whatever
For police tows, yes, ma'am.
for police? Okay. I think that we should give other tow companies, a chance to tow some of the cars from here. I mean, right now I think it's a monopoly, and I'm not so much in favor of monopolies. So I would like to make a motion to approve it and send it to the board.
One that wants to second that.
Okay.
Fails for lack of second. Alderman Walters?
Yes, first of all, just because it didn't have a second doesn't mean that it's not something we would support later on. I think that's important and needs to be said. I have a question that bothers me because I've had some instances. I have a small company, and we've had instances where my drivers have gotten somewhat pressed by tow truck drivers. You need a tow. And one that sticks out in my mind is a guy, he's there and he ran into something, or somebody ran into him. I can't remember exactly what it was. And he said, well, the police here, and they say, well, it looks like it's not drivable to me. And the tow truck driver said, this is in Kansas City, by the way, said, well, we can tow it for you. He says, should I have him tow it? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm only about 3 minutes away. And I jumped in my car and broke a few laws getting down there, so I made it in two. And the police car and the tow truck company was gone, and there was nothing undrivable about the vehicle that got hit. So that's one thing that bothers me. If somebody shows up, let's say, I'm assuming that tow truck drivers, that some of them scan and listen to accidents. Okay, so that's how all of a sudden they magically show up. What if they show up before it's broached? That, okay, here's our list, and people don't know the difference, that they just assume, well, here's a tow truck driver, might as well use him. And they say, yeah, you can tow it. Have they just entered a private contract?
Yeah.
Okay. Would the police department, would you be able to inform the people before they make a decision on towing with somebody? Because I could see this happening in a town like Raytown. We're very close to 350 highway, I-70, 435. They're going to get here quick because these guys are vultures, a lot of them. And I just wonder if there's a way that we could, tell people ahead, give them a heads up. Hey, here's who we advise you to use. This is what their tow fee is. If you use anybody else, it's up to you.
Yeah, it's Jennifer, feel free to help me out here, but we kind of get into that area where of endorsing private businesses.
Mm-hmm.
It's a slippery slope. We actually have our internal policies are to stay away from that sort of thing entirely. It can, because you're endorsing one business and maybe not another business. You're supposed to be impartial. We're a government agency. Jennifer, you got anything on that?
Well, there's also an ordinance with regards to these tow companies aren't allowed to solicit. So they're not allowed to just hang around and wait for, and that's not to say that they don't do that. But the city does have an ordinance on the books with regards to, hey, you can't just be soliciting for business and waiting for things to happen.
But how's it to be enforced? I mean, somebody's...
We will write somebody a ticket. I mean, if we're at the scene of an accident or a disabled vehicle and somebody just shows up and they're not called to the scene, we can actually write them a citation right there. And there's a state law that mirrors our city ordinance. We can write them a citation right there. It's points off their license. There's a fine included, et cetera. And that's pretty universal throughout the metro.
Have
Most
we
tow
used
truck
it?
drivers know that. It's new for us. Basically, the warning went out and the problems went away because Raytown was one of the last few that didn't have that.
I see.
And earlier this year, that was passed by the board, and it helped tremendously at the scene of accidents.
Okay. Well, I don't see where it would be a problem to say, well, this is the city's ordinance, and here's who they contract with. And that does not encourage anybody to go to them, I don't believe. It's just stating a simple fact. And in fact, what it does, it says this is what we in our kind thoughts have done for them. I'm not trying to make light of it, but I know of other situations. My daughter was in an incident one time where they went off the road, and I got there, and the police weren't there. It was just a vehicle going off the road. And she called me, what do? I go on out there and look, and they said, tow truck driver shows up, what do you want me to tow him? So I'm a third party, not even involved in it. I said, no, it won't be necessary. And they drove the car out without any trouble at all. But I just want, if we're going to do something, and the intent is twofold. One, of course, I can understand that you would rather work on police work rather than managing the tow business for other people. That makes sense. At the same time, we want to make certain that in Raytown, you might as well put a sign up on the outside outskirts of the city that says, if you drive a tow truck and you're not with this group, forget it, unless you are called privately in, or something like that. And you don't want to put a sign like that up, obviously, but you want them to be well aware of it, and they'll just stay away. It's like putting night watchmen out watching the people that decide that curfews aren't for them in city parks. It's cut back quite a bit because we're actively enforcing it. So what I'm saying is we can do the same thing with the tow stuff too, and I think that needs some thoughts. And quite honestly, the only reason I know this, Missy in particular, is that because of the discussion that's been going on up here, and without this discussion, I would not have brought it up. And I think there are some valid points there. And I think that's why there is hesitancy as to jump right on and say we got to go real quick on this. Give us some time to think it over.
We understand. We were trying to accommodate the PD schedule of the year end.
Yeah, well, they've got.
At this current time, have we answered all the questions pertaining to that particular one, so we could move to the second one since we are very short on time?
I think there are a couple more.
Okay.
I have a question. What if auto return doesn't accept our fees, or they don't have any tow companies that would accept the fees that we offer? Would we put out a bid for an individual tow, or how would that work?
Yeah, we just wouldn't be able to change the way we're doing it. We'd go through the bid process per usual.
Okay, Alderman Ward, go ahead.
I guess I'd just like to make a motion that we carry this over to, or at least assign it to the full board meeting on December 2nd. That gives us a month to kind of work on this? I mean, does the rest of the committee have a sense or a feeling on that?
Since it's on the agenda for the full board tonight, I think we could make a recommendation.
Sure.
But I'm not sure.
No, I agree. I mean, that would just be the sense of the committee that this should be delayed.
Yeah, but the committee could make a recommendation that it be delayed or tabled rather than coming to the full board. We can make that recommendation, certainly.
I'll second that.
But we can't, I don't think we can actually
No, I
table
agree.
that.
I agree.
Am I correct? Since it is on the agenda.
No, I agree. So my motion, which I think Mr. Walter seconded, would just be that it'd be the recommendation of this committee that it be tabled until the December 2nd meeting.
Is there a second?
I did. Second.
Okay.
Sorry, just for clarification on that, so we have the right date on this, you're wanting the matter to have the second reading on that particular item. You would want the second reading to be held, the item to be held and have the second reading on December the 3rd. Is that correct? December the 2nd is a Monday night.
It was a day off on my, no, ma'am, no, that would be I think it's the committee's recommendation that the first read not be done until December.
Until
3rd.
December 3rd. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and if necessary, you can extend the current contract month to month if necessary. Is that correct?
I'll have to read over the contract again to make sure there's no, as far as I know, yeah. I mean, there's an implementation time for this auto return anyway, so it may end up being that, I don't know, we'll have to talk to and see how we're going to navigate that. But it's not as easy as flipping a switch to go to a new service, so we'll have to take a look at that. It'll be fine.
Okay, I do have some concerns about, rushing into this, and if we actually don't necessarily need to. Go ahead, sir.
All right, it's working. They couldn't hear you earlier. But they couldn't hear him earlier because the microphone was on. But also, that would also have to be agreed upon with the contractor. In order to go to a month-to-month situation, both you and the contractor, us as the owner and the contractor, will both have to be in agreement of that. That could change the terms of the contract. So what you may see as a $90 current tow, they would have to agree to that also. That was under a competitive bid situation. So correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, but typically if you go to a month-to-month situation, you have to look to see if those things may go on. So we just want to be aware of that. So we met those terms. We'll have to agree upon between both parties.
If we do wait until the date of December 2nd for that to come back to the full board, then we probably would have that information by that time as to whether that company would agree to extend that contract month to month that currently has a contract. Can you do that?
We'll have to start having that discussion right away.
Very good.
Is it not on?
Very good.
We'll have to have that discussion with him right away.
Okay.
As far as auto return, they're waiting on us. And
Thank you.
I don't-
Okay.
We would have to have that information back to you before.
Okay. Okay. So there's been a motion and a second.
Yes. So any other discussions before I take a vote? Sorry, just making sure.
Everyone clear on what's being voted on? Okay.
Okay, Alderman Walters?
Yes.
Alderman Moore?
Yes.
Alderman Azer?
Yes.
Alderman Emerson?
No.
Alderman Van Buskirk?
Yes.
Okay.
Passes 4-1.
So very quickly, Alderman Ward, you had asked us to talk about the possibility of modifying code to address illegal parking and possibly ticketing and having that process through PD instead of through the Community Development Department. And for the viewing public, we just thought we would put this up so that they understood all the boxes in yellow is currently how it's being handled. A case would be opened with our Community Development Department. They would issue a letter. That's a 10-day corrective violation letter. Should they not remove the vehicle from the grass or unimproved surfaces, then they would write a citation. That citation then would note the date by which they need to go to court, and all the matter would be turned over to the courts to have them be fined and the judge rule accordingly. So we just wanted the general population to understand how the process is being handled before we started the conversations of the proposed changes you wanted us to consider.
Sure.
So I'll turn it over to Jennifer. I think she's got a few opening remarks, and then we'll let you ask questions and make your recommendations.
In looking at what the city's authority is as a fourth-class city, there is some authority with regards to inoperable vehicles, to derelict vehicles, to unlicensed vehicles, those types of vehicles. There is authority in the statutes to be able to tow. But if what we're talking about are otherwise licensed, operable vehicles that are being parked in on an unimproved surface on their own property, that's where it becomes, there's really no authority that I can find at this point for a city to be able to go do that. Obviously, if someone has a car and they're parking on someone else's lot, that's different. But my understanding, there's a couple different situations that may be occurring right now, such as you may have properties in residential districts where you have lots of cars, lots of family members at a residence, for example, and everybody has a car, and so where do they park them? Sometimes they park them in their yard. And so that's one situation where, as long as the vehicles are operable and licensed, it's difficult to, well, there's no authority for the police to just order a tow service. You'd have to go through this process that Missy just explained with regards to writing a nuisance violation. Other situations that we're aware of is possibly if you've got someone who's working on cars, and maybe they've got one parked in their yard that they're working on, or an unimproved surface, whatever that may be. And so, again, it kind of depends on the situation. So there is some authority out there for towing, but not in all situations, if that helps. So.
Well, so I think I had so I think there's a couple issues. And so the first in terms of towing is, I hope I never suggested that it was taken that I was suggesting that we tow on a first instant. But I guess my question is our authority to tow is, once somebody's been issued a ticket and that behavior persists, can we have that behavior declared as a nuisance, and then that would allow us to go in and abate that nuisance? So that's one question. And second of all, again, I hope I wasn't misunderstood or I failed to communicate properly. But, it's not so much that I wanted this responsibility for ticketing moved over entirely to the police. I just had some questions about whether or not perhaps the police could supplement, especially in those kind of wee hour situations where the person parks at 8 o'clock at night and they move it at 5:30 in the morning, and our codes people just aren't in, they're not in position to be able to do something about it, and just to give them the authority to write those tickets. And again, they're not necessarily going to be out looking for that. But if we have a case where a particular property owner has contacted us numerous times and said, hey, I've got this issue, and you guys are having a hard time catching it, it would seem like we could bring that to the police attention, and as they have time over the next week, help us write those tickets. So those are really two separate issues.
So with regards to then writing the tickets, are you just for a municipal court, which would then
Sure.
decides, okay.
Yeah, just the
Right.
same way that our codes officers would do it.
Right. And I think with regards to what you have in place, again, if it's a vehicle that's parked on an unimproved surface, then I think the police have that authority. The idea, though, of the towing, that gets I feel a little more complicated, depending on, again, are we talking about a vehicle that's unlicensed and inoperable? Or are we talking about a licensed vehicle that is operable? And understanding through the nuisance section, city can go in and abate nuisances, but again, there's no authority for the city to then, in situations, again, where a car is licensed and operable, to be able to tow that.
Does or has our codes department, do they have the authority to tow a vehicle that is inoperable?
Sorry, I was advised by the judge, they do not without a court order.
Okay, so would have to be through the police department.
Well, the codes department can write the ticket that then shows up in municipal court.
And at this point in time, the police department does not write tickets if there's an inoperable vehicle, say in a driveway. They do not write tickets for that, but they do have the authority to do that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right.
I'm on. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, if we could get a little bit of input from Chief
Yeah,
Hudspeth.
absolutely.
Thank you, Chief. Are you aware, or were you aware, that you would have the authority to ticket vehicles that are inoperable if they're on private property?
That's not something.
It's not something we've historically practiced. That's something that's been to codes. No, so that's not an area that we've explored.
And
If you got a request from our codes department, would you do such?
I guess the question is, what's the functional difference over if they're written a ticket by a codes officer or a police officer?
Well, I don't know. Alderman Ward?
Well, I think the difference is that if code says, Chief, we've got a number of complaints on this house, but because of our hours of operations, we're not able to properly document it. Would you have an officer swing by there in the middle of the night as time allows and document this, and if appropriate, ticket it? The functional difference is you're here when the crime may be occurring, and our codes officers aren't.
Okay. So the question is specifically, would we assist them with that? Well, sure. It's a city function, yeah.
Okay.
We ask for their assistance on lots of things.
Thank you, sir. If that's everyone, all of your questions are answered. We do have a regular meeting coming up, so if I can get a motion to.
I have a question.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. My question, there we go. Okay. My question is this, you noticed, you mentioned 10 days. Is that by state statute?
It's by your city ordinance.
We could shorten that? Because to me, if a car is in violation, a car is in violation. And people are kind of wise to how things can be done. I know there's a car that was parked not far from my house over the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and magically it came back onto the street on Monday.
I'd have to check into that because I believe there are some provisions within state statute to give you allowance for mailing time. And so narrowing it to 5 does not guarantee, especially right now in the Raytown mailing cycle, we don't get everything out within 2 days of mailing and it's not delivered because we've had people complain about that. So we do have to allow for the opportunity for them to receive it by mail. So I'll have to check state statute on that.
Can they just go on and just ticket the car like you would on a street?
Your reference to the 10 days starts with the 10-day notice is what I was referring to
Oh,
in
I
the
see what you're
mailing
saying.
of the first letter to notify them to correct it
Do you
before
have
they're
to give a
subject.
letter first?
Yes. You have to give them written notice before they are cited with a citation that they are being fined and come to court.
And that's state law?
Yes, sir.
If you think about it, it's a due process issue, and so if you're going to take someone's property, in essence, you got to give them notice.
Well, I'm not talking about towing, I'm just talking about ticketing.
Yes, sir.
Ticket.
You're being fined. We're trying to give you ample time to correct the nuisance before you're subject to a fine.
Does that apply to speeding on a
No.
road surface? How come?
That's separate.
Obviously, if it's separate, I mean, it's two different items, but.
Yeah, exactly.
Two different sections of state statute.
Right.
That's why.
Oh, I see.
Could those vehicles eventually be towed, or would that be as an order of the court, since it could be part of the abatement process? Could that happen?
We will have to research that with the judge because you're entering into her domain now, not ours, that we do. We give you the 10 days to abate it. If it's not abated, then you are subject to the citation. That's when the code officers would write the tickets, and then we turn those tickets over to the court and have the judge rule in accordance to her guidance.
Are the letters evergreen? I mean, once you give them, it's been given?
No, sir.
It has to be for each incident?
Yes, sir. We'll give you a new one for if we go and see it every week, we can rewrite a letter and write new tickets.
But let's say if I know that somebody's parking there on a regular basis and you inform them you cannot park there, you mean for each time that somebody comes along and sees it, they have to send them a new letter first and wait 10 days before they ticket, even though it's the same incident? If the vehicle's been driven off and then driven back and parked there again?
Right. What we will do is give you 10 days to correct it, so that starts the first 10 days. If after the first 10 days we go and inspect and you're still parking, then you're subject to a citation. If I come back on, let's say, the 12th day, I observe it's still there, I start a whole new case with you, I've issued you a new letter to, again, try to abate and correct the problem, you can be subject to a second ticket. So this is the way we try to address the repeat offenders that Alderman Ward is bringing to our attention, who are constantly doing this repeatedly. So there are some who will end up in court with 23 tickets for parking on improved surfaces because they refuse to abate the problem.
Okay, so in other words, the clock starts over after you issue the first ticket. That's the state law too, I assume.
Yeah, I need a
Law.
motion. I need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye.